Banish, the atmosphere of discovery, where we discover the master's plan for our lives. So today's session is on anger management. Today we're on session 91, and we will be discussing anger management. So anger is an indicator of an unresolved issue or an internal alarm that something is wrong, right? So anger is a normal emotional response. So feeling angry is not always a negative thing, right? But we cannot allow it to make us fall short of the standard that has been set up for us as beings created in the image of God, right? Anger can help you recognize that a boundary has been crossed and then give you the motivation and the energy to defend that boundary. Does that make sense? Anger is layered. Anger can be a feeling, an emotion, a mood, or a behavior, right? So, anger as an emotion is an inward automatic response to protect you by motivating you to respond when someone violates your boundaries, right? Anger as a feeling is how you interpret or become aware of that emotion. Okay. And remember, feelings are subjective, right? They're based on your perception and they are temporary. Anger as a mood is when the emotional state of anger goes beyond just a moment, right? It's longer lasting and it's more persistent. So anger becomes a mood when that emotional state of anger goes past just a moment. Anger as a behavior is how you outwardly express that emotion. Okay, for example, that aggression, assertiveness, right, or withdrawal. Some people withdraw when they're angry. Anger as a behavior is out how you outwardly express that emotion. So if the anger that you feel comes with an intention to cause harm, pain, or discomfort to somebody physically, verbally, psychologically, then you are the aggressor. Okay. Even if you may also be the victim, right? So when we see people with aggressive behavior, it would suggest that they have unresolved issues, and anger is the way that they expressed that unresolved issue, right? And so we'll talk more about that later. Emotions can be hidden because when we are unaware of how we feel, we don't know that those emotions are there, right? Feelings is an indicator or lets you know when a certain emotion is there, okay? So let's remember that our emotions are often hidden, right? They're in our subconscious mind, and then our feelings are in our conscious mind, right? Because it's what we are aware of. So if your emotion was a spark, for an example, then your feelings would be you noticing that there is a fire. Does that make sense? So you don't necessarily see the spark that started the fire unless you're watching it as it sparked, or unless you are the one that is starting the fire, right? And so that's why it's important to acknowledge our feelings so that we know that there's a fire within and we know where the fire is. Okay? If you ignore the fire, it continues to grow until it can no longer be controlled. And then when you can no longer handle it, then that's when outside people have to come in and handle it for you. Okay. Roots of anger. So let's talk about roots of anger, where it starts, right? It can start with fear, shame, and embarrassment, right? Anger is used as a defense response a lot of times, right? Frustration and disappointment, okay, from not meeting your expectations, okay? And most times when you're going in the opposite direction of your purpose, that's where your anger and then depression and then the loss of hope and that pressure goes from going in the wrong direction, okay? Anger also is used to mask hurt and pain. It's used to mask bitterness and resentment. Okay, anger will also be used to express an injustice, which includes grief and loss. Grief and loss feels like an injustice to you, right? You don't think it's fair to lose people, to lose things. Okay, and so we are wired to resist unfair treatment. So with grief and loss, when we feel that it's unfair for people to go for to feel rejected, to feel abandoned, right? We feel that it's a loss and it's unjustified in our minds at that moment, right? So anger moves you to right the wrong, okay, from that perceived threat of that balance that you had in your life, right? When you had those people, when you had those things, your brain wants to correct it, right? But the problem is when it is a death, you can't correct it, right? We all must die. And so we need to, even if we need to remove certain harmful people from our life, right? You feel that need to correct that balance because you're used to the dysfunction, right? And that's why you keep letting those people back in. That's why you keep doing those same things over and over again. So we must first do the work emotionally to make sure that our perspectives are right before these things happen, right? And that's why acceptance and acknowledgement is an important part of grief and loss, right? If you don't get to this point, you will stay angry and possibly never leave people or situations that promote those destructive cycles in your life. Does that make sense? So, a lot of times, anger, I'm telling you why it's in a response to a loss or grief. And we don't just grieve people. You can grieve the way you grieve the way that you used to be. You can grieve your community, right? And we also grieve the things that are toxic to us, right? It's a process. You're gonna go through the angry process, right? Anger can also be a bitter root. And we talked about bitter roots in a previous session, right? And these roots move from being just a feeling to a condition of the heart and soul. That's what bitter roots are. Okay. And they're able to do this because once that bitter seed has been planted, it is watered. And those roots are watered through your unmanaged thoughts, right? They're watered through your unprocessed emotions. That's watering it, right? And they're also being watered by those uncomfortable experiences that happen in all of our life. We will all go through some measure of discomfort in our lives. To pull these roots, you have to understand what you feel. Okay, that means acknowledging it and saying what it is. We're not ignoring it, right? You can't pull up something that you don't acknowledge is there. So it takes understanding what you feel, right? Then processing that emotion. So the feelings tell you what emotion is there, right? So once you know what you feel, you begin to process that emotion, right? Don't react right away, okay? Begin to regulate it. And then you transform it. And transform it is doing the opposite of what the root is, right? So if the root is fear, then you find safety, right? If it's hurt, then you find healing, so on and so forth, right? And then you change how you perceive the situation that caused the anger. Okay, so to pull those bitter roots, you understand what you feel, right? Process the emotion and then transform it. Okay. So the intensity and the expression of your anger determines how big it will grow. The intensity and the expression of your anger determines how big it will grow. Anger can go from just a minor irritation, right, to full-on rage. Okay, there's levels to it. Anger can be managed a whole lot easier, right, than rage. Okay, that's why you catch it before it gets to that point. Rage is anger that has grown to an overwhelming emotional intensity, which causes you to lose control. Okay. Rage is like the highest form of anger. So rage is released and expressed through very impulsive and aggressive behavior, right? All rage is anger. It's the highest form of anger, right? All rage is anger, but not all anger is rage. Okay? Because remember, sometimes anger is helpful, right? Because it is our internal warning system. And so this is how we use anger correctly, right? The way that God intended for it to be used. You shouldn't be more focused on punishing the offender than the morality of the offense, right? Which means that you need to ask, is what has happened right or wrong, right? Some stuff you think is wrong just because you don't like it, just because you don't like who said it or you don't like how they said it, right? That doesn't mean it's wrong. So you first judge, is this right or wrong, right? And the next question would be, who is the vindicator, right? Would it be the judge or the judge, right? Most of the time, you are not the vindicator. So all of these years, you might have been angry about a thing and you've been waiting for revenge. You've wasted valuable moments of your life and brain space that could have been used to prosper you, right? Emotional space that could have been used for you to receive love, to receive joy, but it's filled with anger, right? You probably have some health problems and health challenges because of all of that anger built up, and you're waiting for that moment to, avenge yourself. Okay? So often we allow anger to hold too much space in our lives, and it is robbing us of the freedom and opportunities to thrive in this world because we're just so angry. Okay? But you built that world. You built that world with anger. Okay? You have the ability to create your world, right? To speak what you want, to feel what you want. These are all choices. We choose what comes out of our mouth, right? We choose what we think. We choose what we dwell on. We choose what to feel, right? But you allowed anger to form your entire world. Okay, so it goes from just being a feeling to now it's managing and ruling and directing your life, right? So, like I said, anger can start as an annoyance or as an irritation, right? And then it grows into frustration. And then it grows into hostility. And then finally, rage, right? So think about the last time that you were angry. What was the measure of its intensity? And at which point will you admit that you could have turned it? You could have changed it, right? You could have made a better decision. Well, after today, let's do that, right? Let's not let or allow the anger to intensify, right? Let's use it correctly, okay? So your love, your peace, your kindness will leave a memory that people can store and then save it for later, right? Remember, we talked about memories and how they affect how we live our lives. But so does your anger, rage, and hatred. So your anger, rage, and hatred can leave a memory that people can store and save for later. So that's why it is very important for us to manage what we say, how we respond in that anger. Okay? So even your muscles, your bones, your organs, your cells, the chemicals and hormones in your body remembers what you've done and what you're doing, and it will be accessed or retrieved later. That's why we must be mindful of what we do and what we say and what it can cause, right? Alethea, we were talking about to pull those roots. It takes understanding what you feel, processing the emotion, right? And then transform it. Okay, so understand what you feel, meaning you acknowledge it, saying what it is. You process the emotion, right? Regulate it, and then transform it, which means you do the opposite of what the root is, right? So if it's fear that's causing the anger, you find safety. Okay, if it's hurt that's causing the anger, you find healing. That's how you transform it. Okay, so whatever starts in your memory begins a memorial. Whatever starts in your memory begins a memorial, right? It is a place in your mind that continues to be built up as a support system for evil strongholds or success, right? It starts building those blocks, and it's memory. It's what God designed, right? So it continues to build up that support system, and it could either build it up as an evil stronghold, or it can build it up for your success, right? But you determine what you allow to build that memorial, right? You choose which it will be depending on how much unforgiveness you harbor, depending on how much resentment, grudges, anger, excuses, and reasons that prevent growth and completions, right? So every time you recall a person, an event, or an idea, you are keeping a memorial, right? What and who have you been memorializing in your mind? Every time you think about it, every time you bring it up, right? You're keeping a memorial, right? So what and who have you been memorializing? Have you been memorializing your failures? That's all you think about? Have you been memorializing your sins? Is that all you think about? Right? Have you been lifting that up more than your accomplishments, more than the things that you've overcome? Right? This is how those things create those strongholds, right? When you should be focused more on success, you're focused more on the failures. Does that make sense? And whichever one you focus on starts building a memorial in your mind, right? So some people live from memories, okay? Some people love from memories, right? But they're not connected to the present, so they end up losing their future, right? So sometimes even good memories, you stay living in those memories so much that you have not realized what's happening right now in the present. And that can literally cause you to end up losing your future. So memories is very important. What you're storing, what you're retrieving, what you're recalling. It's scientific, it's spiritual, it's also natural, right? So emotional and mental pain will mask itself as anger, fear, and frustration, right? A lot of angry people have unprocessed pain and fear. And we talked about unprocessed pain. That is session 63. And then fear was session 57. Like, go check out all the sessions. Go to the full sessions and check out all the sessions. We dive a little bit deeper into those things. When you learn how to manage your emotions by managing your thoughts, you don't respond to people's angry words and actions so quickly, right? Anger can rest in your heart and even cause heart attacks, heart failure, right? If you don't deal with the pain behind it, right? And so we are in control of how we express our emotions. It is a choice, right? And we learned this in the last session, okay? If you don't want your anger to look like a crash out, choose how it will be expressed before you become overwhelmed, right? Choose now. Okay, when I get angry, the next time I get angry, and you will, right? Because that's a natural response. How do I want that to look? And then that's what you do, right? Do what you said. Do what you want. Do what you want to see, okay? When your thoughts become impulsive and your mind begins racing, or your temper begins to flare up and your heart starts pumping harder and beating faster, you have to recognize that these signals are your body alerting you that anger is on its way, that rage is on its way, that you, and some people can shift from those different levels of anger pretty quick. Okay, so some of you, once you feel angry, you got to start watching your thoughts immediately. Like, don't let them escalate, because your thoughts is going to feed it. And it's going to either feed it in the right direction towards rage, or it's going to feed it down to where you regulate that emotion. Does that make sense? Okay, so take away the aggression. Okay, calm down. Look for a solution, right? Anger fades when there's a resolution. So when you start looking for a solution, not looking for to punish, not looking for violence, not looking for vengeance, but looking for a solution, that's two different things. Okay? Start looking for a solution, and that anger will fade. Okay? And so we must be careful where we place the energy that anger provides, right? Because remember, it is a natural response that is given, that motivates us and gives us energy to find safety, right? That's why God placed it there. But if you put that energy in the wrong place, if you put it towards rage, now you have the fuel you need to physically act on the violence, to physically act on the aggression. And this energy is a force meant to motivate you to safety, not vengeance and not violence. That is not what that extra energy is for, right? So y'all understand, when you get angry, you get stronger, right? You get louder. That extra energy is not for that, right? It's to motivate you to safety. It's to motivate you to find a solution. That's why God put it there, right? Not for violence and not for vengeance, right? So if this is where you have been placing that energy, then acknowledge that, and then choose to redirect that aggression and choose how you want to express the anger. Stop just doing the first thing that comes to your mind. You choose. It's your responsibility to choose how you're going to express that anger, right? Ask yourself, how can I use that energy not to get even, but to get free? Okay? How can I use this energy not to get even, but to get free? Look for solutions, not revenge. Okay? Anger, while we often see it as something negative, it's not always the enemy. It's a signal. I want you to change the way you even think about being mad from this day forward. It's a signal. It tells us that something is off, that something is hurting, right? That something needs to be addressed. But we must learn to listen to what our anger is truly saying, not just react because it's so loud, right? Because of how much noise it makes. We need to think about, what is it actually telling us? What is it revealing to us? God gave us emotions for a reason, not to control us, but to help guide us, right? Anger is meant to alert, not to destroy. And a lot of us may have been using anger to destroy, okay? It's meant to protect boundaries, not to violate other people, okay? So don't let anger become the builder of your life and your relationships or your future. You are the builder, okay? Take the pencil out of anger's hand, right? You are the one that will build according to what you speak, according to what you do, your actions, your reactions, right? So redirect it and release it. Okay, so I hope from this point on, you no longer see anger as an excuse to express violence or aggression, right? You see anger as an alert system, as a signal, right? A signal that something's wrong, something needs to be addressed, and then address it, right? Admit how you feel, right? To number, because some people have hidden anger because they're not addressing how they feel. So you don't even know you are angry and you're smiling, right? Because you're not even addressing your feelings. So you don't even know anger's there. You just like, oh, yeah, that's not a fire. Let me turn this way. No, you see the smoke. You know it's a fire, right? So address your anger, right? Process the emotion that it's revealing to you, and then transform it. So transform it means you do the opposite, okay? So if you're feeling fearful and you're using, and anger is showing up, anger is the way that you express fear. Do the opposite. Find safety, find solutions. When you're angry, stop saying you're angry and you're mad and I'm just going to do X, Y, Z. Okay? That's not what we're saying anymore. Okay? We're going to address it. We're going to acknowledge it. We're going to regulate that emotion. We're going to see it as a signal, right? And then we're going to transform it. We're going to find a solution and then do the solution, right? So I hope that this helps you understand more about you. Just diving a little deeper, and we're going to go as deep as God takes us, right? So some people don't, they see the scripture of renew your mind. Well, yeah, you can know what you're supposed to do, but sometimes you don't know how to do it. Does that make sense? And so these sessions teach you how. It helps you understand those emotions. We're not taught how to understand what we feel or even express how we feel correctly, right? So you choose how to express it. Okay. And so this is not just stuff for you all. This is stuff that I have to live, that I have to do. Okay. So I really had a really bad anger problem until my husband told me one day, you know, you don't have to be angry. And I didn't know I didn't have to be angry. Okay. So I'm telling you, you don't have to be angry. You can be angry, right? But how you respond to that anger, see it as a signal, and then find a solution the next time you get mad. See it as a signal that something's broken, something's missing, something needs to be addressed. Find a solution, not revenge, right? So that's your responsibility the next time you get angry. So that concludes our session for today. If you know angry people, before they end up in the grave or in jail, send this session to them, okay? They may not understand. They may have unprocessed pain, right? Anger may be the way that they express their fear, that they express their shame or their guilt. Okay? Exactly. Exactly. So anger is a natural emotion that God placed there to alert us of something. But we are not to sin in that anger, right? So if you were wondering how to walk that out, this whole session just taught you. Okay, so if you didn't catch everything, it'll be available as soon as this is over. Definitely share this. There's too many angry people in the world, right? And even people that are always smiling. We've seen, I don't know how many of y'all watch um, certain shows, but the ones that are always smiling, not acknowledging what they feel, has the anger, it's in there. Okay. So if that's you, if you've been smiling through the anger and ignoring it, no, address it. Right. And if you need help with that, of course, we offer individual sessions. Just go to www.edwinabayou.com. That's EDWINAEBAYEWU. And you can go ahead and book individual sessions if you need help, because sometimes it's layered. Okay. Sometimes two things can be right. Sometimes we think it's just black and white. Sometimes it's not black and white. So you go through one feeling and you find out that it was really five, right? You thought it was just this one thing, and then even one incident, one situation in your life can cause many different things, and so we can separate it and go through each one. I'm a very thorough person. I believe even just doing surface stuff. So it may be presenting itself as anger, but it might be resentment and bitterness and hatred and all kinds of stuff that's underneath that. And so we want to address all of it, right? And it doesn't matter if it's two things or 200 things. As long as you're alive, you have the opportunity to get those things processed and live a life, right, that was destined for you, that was written for you. Okay. So God bless you all, and I will see you all next Friday at 3 p.m.